All right, I think some folks will continue to join throughout, but we can go ahead and get formally started. I suppose I should say good morning and good afternoon, depending on where you are joining us from. And thank you, Carl, for joining us from Colorado, especially early in the morning, your time. And thank you all for joining us. I'm really excited to have this conversation as part of APCO's commitment to democracy and having open dialogues about significant topics in the run-up to the upcoming U.S. elections, just I think 14 days from now. And so I'm thrilled to welcome Carl Hulse from the New York Times to a conversation with us. Forgive me for reading from a script for a second, but with Carl's impressive background, I want to make sure everybody hears it. In 1985, Carl began working at the DC bureau of the New York Times and covered primarily regional editions, first as a night editor working 3 p.m. to midnight, then began covering Capitol Hill in 2002, and from 2011 to 2014, became the Washington editor for the Times, coordinating all of the Washington coverage of the White House, the executive branch, Congress, the courts, and the Pentagon. And then for more than a decade, Carl has served as the New York Times chief correspondent for Washington and is considered a leading American authority on congressional affairs. I met Carl about a year and a half ago, and more recently, Carl authored a book called Confirmation Bias, which I have read cover to cover, which offers kind of a behind-the-scenes account of Washington's reaction to the Supreme Court vacancy at the death of Antonin Scalia, all the way to the confirmation of Justice Brett Kavanaugh. I'd originally wanted to have this conversation with Carl and us and guests in person about a year ago, but given the COVID environment, obviously it got put on hold. And now with the vacancy, due to the death of Justice Ginsburg, Carl has graciously agreed to speak with us via Zoom. So welcome, Carl. Thank you. And to my colleagues, you can use the Q&A function. As you could see, I am in our DC office today. I did that so that I could have my multiple monitor setup. So during this conversation, if you have a question, it will appear on my screen, and I'll try and jump around from those. So please feel free to lob in any questions throughout. I figured what we would do is start with the book and then get into a little bit of the just kind of the very quiet election cycle that we find ourselves in with very little news. This is your first book, Carl, and you've been covering Washington for years. What prompted this book and just kind of the decision to tackle this first?
Yeah, that's a great question. As you can see, I'm in what the room raider guy on Twitter called my COVID cabin. So up in Colorado, but that actually figures into the story to some degree. I never really wanted to write a book that much because it's a lot of work, and we're writing all the time. I have written some screenplays that had been optioned but never made. I wanted to write a piece of fiction because when you're writing all day, and journalists, sometimes it's good to be able to go and make it up. Though some people think we make it up, we really don't.
But the president might think that you do.
Yeah, but we really, really don't. In fact, we're so incredibly careful most of the time. And I say this facetiously, but it was also true. But I was looking to buy, some guys came to me and said, who turned out to be my agent, said, "Hey, we think you should write a book. This is the point in your career. You should write a book." And I said, well, I've never been that interested in writing a nonfiction book, but I am interested in buying a place in Colorado. So maybe we can work something out where it's to the benefit of both of us. And I just decided to go ahead with this book. I always thought that judicial confirmation have been overlooked as a political topic and for the impact they have on people. And since I had covered them all, I'd been around Washington since '85. I was even there for Bork's hearing, though I wasn't involved in the coverage. Of course, I was around for the Clarence Thomas hearings. And I said to them that I think there's a great story in this and how it helped Trump win election in 2016. I think it was maybe the dominant factor that ended up electing him. And so we decided to go ahead with the book. And then as the book was being written, of course, Anthony Kennedy quit, which is in the book. And it's actually one of my favorite parts of the book, the machinations that go into kind of convincing Justice Kennedy to leave, and then how they handle his announcement. And then there's the Kavanaugh hearing. So I just kept writing, and I think that the book is more timely than ever. The book, to me, explains exactly how we're in the position we're in right now with the political fight over the Amy Coney Barrett hearing. So I've been telling people, if you want to know why this is happening the way it is, pick up my book and read it. And actually, some of them have. I've been hearing from a lot of people who are reading my book right now.
Yeah, that's not surprising, and they're better for it. You talk about Trump, kind of this being a dominating issue that maybe helped him get elected in 2016. At least as I see it more broadly, there's often a lot more energy on the right than there is on the left with regard to the Supreme Court and the judiciary on the whole. Do you think that that holds true this year, or do you think that there is a lot of energy given kind of the dynamic of how Mitch McConnell handled Merrick Garland versus how he's handling this?
Yeah, I think that if there's ever going to be a switch in this, now is the time. And it goes to an interesting point here. I think when Justice Ginsburg died on a Friday night, I happened to be in an extremely rural part of Colorado and had about 15 minutes to write a big story that night. But there was some tension and uncertainty among Republicans as to whether they should try and do the confirmation, the actual vote on the confirmation before or after the election, which, as you said, is now exactly 2 weeks from today, although much of the country is really voting right now. So I think that there was some thought on the Republican side that maybe we have a hearing, but we hold off the vote on the confirmation until after the election to motivate our voters, because then they'll say, okay, we have this election hanging there. But I also think that what happened to the Republicans is that they decided that they could genuinely lose control of the Senate in the election, and they decided to go ahead and make sure they get this done before the election. Now, of course, they could still have a vote after the election. Even if they lose the majority, they would be in office until January 3rd. But if you lost the majority, they would lose one of their main arguments for going ahead and doing this, that we won seats in 2018, we can do this, the voters told us, as opposed to what happened with the Democrats in 2016. So having done that, the result of that is the Democrats and their allies and their voters are really mad about this. So this could be a situation where Democrats are helped more by what's happened. And I've talked to a lot of the top guys. I'm writing a lot about the Senate races, and Democrat strategists who were really involved, spending millions of dollars on these races, doing polling every day, think that overall this is helping their candidates this time. So that is a switch from Kavanaugh 2016. So the Republican, but at the end of the day, the Republicans will get their person on the court.
Well, what do you make? So in that vein, what do you make of the conversation around the Democrats' threat to, or at least some Democrats' threat to stack the court, assuming they take the White House and control of the Senate? Do you think that there's any there? And what do you make of Joe Biden's kind of refusal to answer that question?
Yeah, great questions. You read the book. At the end, I talk a lot about how I think this is going to become more and more a part of political campaigns. I probably didn't think it was going to even become this much of a part of political campaigns this year. I think that the Democrats will be under a lot of pressure to move ahead and expand the court. There's a lot of people who think that that's the only fair way to achieve balance now, after what Democrats say is a stolen seat in 2016, and then Republicans have continued to do this. The big thing that you have to do first, though, is get rid of the filibuster if you're going to do that. I think that there's probably more of a chance that Democrats will try to get rid of the filibuster, because that's going to allow them to do a lot of things beyond expanding the court. And then I think expanding the court will take a while. I think that's going to percolate a bit. I think the question with Biden, who hasn't wanted to go near this issue, is because he is, instinctively against it. He's a guy who was the chairman of the Judiciary Committee. He was in the Senate for 40 years or so. He doesn't want to make these kind of changes. That's not who Joe Biden is in terms of the Senate, but he's under all this pressure from the left, and he needs their support right now. I think it's more likely that Democrats will try and get rid of the filibuster if they get control. And then I think the court stuff will take a while. Rahm Emanuel just wrote a piece that's appearing around. People could Google it and find it. His argument is, let's do this stuff legislatively. Let's not change the courts and look like we're just acting out of spite. Let's just move ahead with legislation and put that through. But I think people are voting on the court this year probably more than they have ever in the past, particularly on the Democratic side.
You mentioned that Joe Biden is probably instinctively against it, and that's largely because he's been a legislator for the better part of his life, and he would kind of see this as something that should be kind of kept as it is. I mean, FDR couldn't even get this through as part of the New Deal. What other areas of kind of policymaking do you think the left will drag him into as if he wins? Not just
I think his issues with them are with the voters on the left, Green New Deal, Medicare for all. Joe Biden doesn't want to go as far as progressives do on either of those issues, and probably, if you really get down into the weeds, quite a few more. He's pushed back on the Green New Deal as recently as the debate, said or the town hall last week, said he wasn't, for getting rid of fracking, Medicare for all. Biden's position more is for the public option, which is interesting because if you go back to the development of the healthcare bill, the public option was seen as the super progressive position. But I think this is going to be a constant tension if there is a Biden administration, which we don't know yet, with the left. I think this is where he's going to run into his pressure points. Joe Biden still thinks that he can win election, go over to the Senate where he ruled, the roost for so long, reach out and talk to Republicans, maybe even Mitch McConnell, and say, hey, let's go back to the good old days and make some deals. I'm not convinced those good old days exist anymore. Watching what's gone on in the Senate over the last 10 years, for sure, and really since the start of President Obama's term in 2009. But he's going to give it a try, I think, and that's probably going to create some hue and cry on the left from people who say, just give it up with the Republicans. I don't expect the Biden administration to do anything super drastic about the Senate until they try to work with Republicans. And then if they don't get anywhere, then they say, okay, we have no other option. Let's ditch the filibuster and ditch Mitch in some ways.
Yeah. Let me jump back to the court piece and thinking about some of the major social issues that, at least in my opinion, often are what I think are partisan fundraising ploys to some extent. What do you think the likelihood, putting the court packing piece aside, what do you think the likelihood of something like a Roe v. Wade or Obergefell is of actually being overturned, assuming that Amy Coney Barrett is eventually confirmed? Do you think that those are fundraising ploys, or do you think that there's real legitimacy? I mean, I've watched how Gorsuch has voted recently, and I'm just curious of your take there.
I mean, so I watched pretty much every minute of the interviews with her over 2 days, and she was not willing to say that she wouldn't join an effort to overturn either of those. And that's just a fact. I don't know what her thinking is. She was very definitive and declarative that she hadn't made up her mind on any of these things. But I wrote a big piece for the Times on the fact that what was hampering her so much was not what she wasn't saying, but what the president has said. the president has said definitively that he's going to appoint justices that will overturn Roe and that would join him in opposition to the Affordable Care Act, which was really the issue that the Democrats tried to hone in on during the hearings, because that's the big issue that their candidates are running on out in the states. And it was this unique thing. And this is another reason why I think Democrats think they benefited. The message at the hearings dovetailed with the message that their candidates are Republicans are a threat to the Affordable Care Act. Now, Republicans say the case that's coming up the week after the election, in a weird bit of timing, is very narrow. So it was interesting to listen to Republicans who for years have been talking about the courts overturning the Affordable Care Act, saying, oh, wait a minute, this case that's up is not really that big a deal. It won't lead to the Affordable Care Act being overturned. So that was interesting. But I mean, I say I know a lot about the politics of the Supreme Court and how you get to the Supreme Court. I'm not a lawyer, as they say, but I think for overturning cases, big precedent, even though she wouldn't call these super precedent, it takes time. There has to be a lot of cases. So I think if there is action to really reverse these precedents, it'll take a while. And also in my book, I talk a lot about the reason that some of the conservative Republicans, Don McGahn, who was the White House counsel for Trump, was his campaign attorney, who was really behind the judicial action in the Trump administration. The social issues are big with them. Of course, it's big on the right, but Don McGahn and some of the folks that he was aligned with, they want to undo federal regulatory power. And this is a big aim of theirs. They call it, the administrative state. They want to undo the administrative state. These cases don't get the attention of the big social issues, but they are, but that's also something that's going to happen with the court when they get another conservative. And then just last night, the four conservatives, you probably hear a lot about this today. There's an appeal out of Pennsylvania to block a Supreme Court ruling there that would allow more time, I think, for absentee ballot counting and things like that. And the Supreme Court denied that request from Republicans in Pennsylvania, but the four conservatives, but not John Roberts, so Kavanaugh, Gorsuch, Thomas, Alito, they were joining with the Republicans. So the fear today, and you'll see this in a lot of stories, is that Barrett gets on the court. She's the fifth vote there. So people are looking at that case pretty closely today.
Yeah, let me, I'm going to pivot to a question that just came in the chat, and I'll just read it so that it gets its fair assessment. Is this current sort of behavior around nominations actually new, or is this simply a more open view into the behind the scenes reality that has been around for decades? Yeah, I mean, well, as you know, Dan, my book covers pretty much about 20 to 25 years of court fights. I would say it's always been, there's always been partisanship around the court fights, and including a lot of people would take it to back to Bork in 1987. But, Mitch McConnell and other folks, they remember these fights with Nixon's nominees in the late 60s. This is what got Mitch McConnell. He was in a Senate staffer, a young Senate staffer. He saw what he thought was some unfair treatment of nominees, and he's been obsessed, honestly, with Supreme Court nominations ever since. So, but what I think is different is that there's been this gradual ratcheting up of the partisanship. And some of it goes back to what went on in the Senate after George W. Bush was elected. Democrats started filibustering appeals court judges. Republicans fought back, blocked Obama. Democrats changed the rules to get more judges. So it's just been a pretty steady uptick. And one of the reasons that I talk about this in the book is that because we've had this legislative gridlock, super partisanship, polarization in Washington, the courts and the Supreme Court have become the arbiter of all these big policy fights and these cultural fights.
So now everybody sees the court as the last bastion, and it's just elevated the emphasis on these confirmations. So I do think that there's sort of a political answer, but there's been court fights forever, but they're super partisan now. But the changes in the rules have stripped the minority of the ability to do much about it. The Democrats are screaming and they're using their procedural tools, but they really can't stop it. So the fights are loud and angry, but the end result is kind of known.
Yeah, I mean, I've read and seen the punditry that if this were normal times, so to speak, and less partisan, that the merits of Amy Coney Barrett and her background should clear like 70 votes in the Senate, but certainly won't.
Well, that's when you talk about Ginsburg. Only 3 people opposed her. I think Scalia was unanimous, but those days are long gone. Kind of what I was talking about earlier. The good old days of the Senate are even though they weren't that good, they're not happening anymore.
Yeah, that's fair. There's been a lot of chatter around Amy Coney Barrett and kind of her religion and being Catholic, but there are a lot of Catholics on the court and have been in history. How much does religion really play in this and in the confirmation process on the whole?
So I'm totally going to dodge all these questions because at a book event 2 years ago, I'm a Catholic, raised Catholic. My kids went to Catholic schools. I made a couple Catholic jokes, and I've been getting beat up as anti-Catholic ever since, which I'm totally not. But I mean, the Catholics do have a presence on the court, and it's unusual. I think the more interesting thing about this is the Republicans saw that as they were trying to trap the Democrats into a fight over Amy Coney Barrett's Catholicism, very devout Catholicism. And because at her confirmation for a federal, the circuit court seat, Dianne Feinstein had made some very pointed comments about the extent of her Catholicism. And so Republicans immediately started attacking Democrats as soon as the nomination was made, that they're going to question her religion, which of course is against the Constitution. And Democrats just totally stayed away from it. They realized it was an issue that was going to be cause a backlash for them, even though they had thoughts on it. They just didn't go there. Now, that didn't stop Republicans who continued to accuse the Democrats of anti-Catholicism, but it definitely wasn't an issue in this confirmation. And I'm not going to make any jokes about it.
Got it. You mentioned Dianne Feinstein. In the book, you have a chapter called "The Letter," and this gets at more of the Kavanaugh hearings. Talk a little bit about that, the unrest that Democrats had with how Feinstein handled the letter and just kind of
and we see that
unraveled.
and we see that playing out now. But basically, what happened was she had gotten these reports of a complaint, a very specific one from a woman who had written this letter and sent it to Senator Feinstein as the top Democrat on the committee, alleging sexual misconduct against Brett Kavanaugh. And instead of kind of bringing in her colleagues and saying, how do we do this? She sat on it. They didn't know how to handle it. Then it exploded when there was a leak, and all her colleagues were like, well, wait a minute, we should have known about this. And I think, both sides would acknowledge at this point that whole episode would have been much better handled as a regular part of the hearing, that instead of having to go back and have another hearing and address it. So there was some unrest there, and we did a story, Politico did a very good story with people questioning her ability to be aggressive enough in these hearings and to really carry the Democratic position. Of course, there was no real thought of taking her out of that position at these hearings. They were going to go pretty fast. So but there was unrest about whether she was going to be aggressive enough. And then, of course, she really added to it herself at the end of the hearing last week when she congratulated Lindsey Graham on running such a great hearing, saying it was one of the best she'd ever attended, giving Lindsey Graham a hug at the end of it. Well, Dianne Feinstein was the only Democrat on the committee who thought that was a good hearing. Most of them thought it was illegitimate, should have never been had. They were very unhappy with the way she ended it. And so now what we're seeing is pressure from the left, demand justice, a new advocacy group, NARAL, saying she needs to be replaced if the Democrats take control of the Senate. They don't want her to be the chair of the Judiciary Committee if that happens next year. And I think that's going to be a problem for Chuck Schumer, if the Democratic leader. How do you handle this situation? So definitely something to watch next year.
Let me pivot to just kind of the interactions between presidents and Congress. In the book, you talk about how Mitch McConnell and particularly Senator Grassley hate being lectured by any president. And I'll let you give your example that I chuckle at. But what is your take on kind of the difference between how they've interacted with Obama to Trump, and the fact that Trump publishes his list of potential nominees? Just talk about that interaction and
yeah.
The lecture.
I mean, there's a lot to be talked about here. I mean, I want to start from this point. Members of Congress, especially the Senate, no matter their stature, they love the president courting them. They love that. You know, Trump calls these Republican members all the time. And I've heard a million stories where, you know, Republicans are somewhere on the golf course or something, Trump calls, and, you know, the senator getting the call shows everybody, oh, I got the president on the line, you know, let's talk. And, it shows their importance. So no matter how important they think that you might think they are, they still like that. So a little stroking of senators goes a long way when it comes to the White House. Barack Obama was not that guy. He did not feel, even though he had been in the Senate, and maybe because he had been in the Senate, you know, he didn't want to do it. And that, of course, created he was not somebody who was going to really schmooze these guys. That just wasn't him. And it probably hurt him. And that was his famous line, was like, people go, oh, you should go up and have a drink with Mitch McConnell. And he goes, why don't you go have a beer with Mitch McConnell? You know, he's not going there. So, but Mitch McConnell, he saw Obama as just sort of as a drive-by senator who then got into the White House and didn't really want to talk, but wanted to talk at senators. And I think the thing you're referring to in my book is that McConnell gets a call. McConnell's a big baseball fan. McConnell gets a call from Obama about, I can't even remember what the issue is, it's in the book, but he says he puts down the phone and watches a full inning of baseball before Obama lets him talk. And I guess that would be with the commercials between innings and everything. So, there was a lot of tension there with McConnell. And I think the Garland case, as I lay out in my book, so Antonin Scalia dies February, Obama comes up with the nominee March, Merrick Garland. He goes with a person that Republicans had previously said they could support, but that was when the Democrats controlled the Senate. So people think that Obama, maybe himself, his administration didn't really do enough to get Garland through. But in my book, I sort of come to the conclusion that there probably was nothing they could do to move McConnell from that position, that they dug in, they had the votes, they were going to do it, and they were willing to take the risk. And as it turned out, it benefited them because Trump's sister is now a retired federal judge. Trump knew a little bit about the federal judiciary. So Scalia dies, Ted Cruz starts to circulate rumors that one, Trump is going to appoint his sister, who was considered not anti-abortion enough by some Republicans, or he's going to nominate some other more moderate judge. So Trump immediately, he sort of realizes in his gut he has to head these guys off. So he comes up with this idea of, well, let me put out a list of the people I would put on the court, and that'll show conservatives that I'm going to be okay on this. And it was this weird gut level political reaction, but turned out to be a benefit, because conservatives looked at that and said, well, we don't like Trump, we don't like the Access Hollywood tape, we don't like a lot of things about him, but we like that list of nominees. And, I think, and most other people who were involved think, that that was a major turning point for Trump, because in the exit polls, I don't remember the numbers exactly, showed that people who were going to vote on the Supreme Court as their primary issue voted for Trump.
That's actually a really good segue. I want to talk a little bit more about the election, since we've talked quite a bit about the court now. You just used the phrase exit polling. Obviously, in 2016, I see all over my social media right now people showing the image of Hillary Clinton having a 91% chance of winning 2 weeks out.
Was that on that thing on the Times, our thermometer?
Yeah.
We still deal with that.
Yeah, I mean, everybody had it. I mean, if you thought 91% chance of winning, and then she lost.
Right.
So we still have 2 weeks to go, and a lot of people remember that from 2016. What do you make of just kind of the state of polling these days, and what people can trust and what they can't trust, and how do you square that?
Yeah, I think, right now everyone is struggling with their 2016 hangover, in a way, where everyone assumed, including Donald Trump, by the way, I don't want to leave him out, that he was going to lose based on polling. I will say, I thought Hillary would probably win, but I had said, I was doing a lot of public events at that time. I said, you got to count the votes, and you never know how these things are going to go. But it did look like Hillary Clinton was going to win. I think I'm no polling expert. I think people misunderstand polling, that they think it's like a definitive outcome of the game, so to speak. It's like saying at the halftime of a game, well, it's certainly going to happen this way. And they do a lot of that now with sports gambling. You can get down into the minute by minute of who's going to win. And but sometimes somebody pulls an upset, and they do the impossible and they win. And that kind of is what happened in 2016. I think polling right now is pretty definitive that Biden's ahead, is going to win. Talking to pollsters, strategists all the time, most of them think this election is over. But because of what happened in 2016, no one's going to come out and say that. I think if Trump manages to win this election, I mean, people are just going to go, forget it with the polls. We can't take it anymore. It's there's so much polling, and it drives a lot of interest in stories. So we poll more because people want to read about polls. But I think everybody did kind of learn a lesson in 2016, and is not willing to declare this over. Back when I started out in politics, elections were decided by now, but now with 24-hour news cycle, all this, the social media, they keep going. However, it's also strange this year. So millions of people have already voted. And no matter what happens in the next 2 weeks, those votes are in. And so we're kind of still learning about modern elections and how all this early voting, mail-in voting. I'm in Colorado. It's a completely mail-in state, has been for a long time. A lot of people have voted here already. So, but I don't want to be a pollster after the election if Trump wins, because they're going to hear about it.
Fair enough. A lot of what we do at APCO is counsel our clients and advise our clients on kind of how to navigate Washington or policy positions that that our clients have an interest in. Thinking about kind of 2021, we're obviously going to have to, regardless of who wins the election, there are a laundry list of things that we have to do, and just in terms of governing the country. And thinking about how divided we are right now, what is your take on just kind of the political center? Do you think that there is space for centrists to have significant influence in the policymaking process by kind of tipping the scales, either being far left or far right? We've talked a lot about, like, okay, Biden's going to get yanked to the left on certain issues. But if the Senate tightens up even further, do you think that there's space for kind of the centrist?
Yeah, I think, I'm someone who has covered the middle forever. That's been one of my areas. I mean, especially in the Senate, this is where deals are made. And I think, people who've read my book always say, well, that last chapter is kind of disheartening because you say that the outlook isn't good here, for getting it together and people coming together. And I said, I wish I could say chances are better, but I think, I'll be blunt here. I think this is the last chance for the middle if Biden wins, because he is a centrist, and I think he'll make an attempt to do it, but I'm not sure it's there anymore. I'm really not. I think that, Susan Collins, one of the last few real kind of deal makers in the Senate, it got real trouble and is in big danger of losing. I think that, and that's where I talk about the filibuster. If the filibuster is eliminated, then that eliminates the pressure to find bipartisanship, and then you would just be, the parties are going to go it alone. They won't need that other side. I think that this is a crucial moment for sort of centrist government, and it may be the last gasp. I hate to say that, but I'm looking at it as somebody who's covered this for a while, and I'm just being realistic. Now, you do have people like Joe Manchin. Kristen Sinema has sort of put herself in a center role in the Senate, and Mitt Romney is somebody who's talked about wanting to govern in a bipartisan way, but they might just get rolled over. But we shall see. I think the next year has the potential to be extremely interesting in terms of how our government functions and what the future of, the sort of way we have conducted congressional business in the past, whether that's going to continue to be the way to do it. And I think this is the big test.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I know you're headed to Montana tomorrow to cover the Senate race there.
It's also free. It's like a blizzard there too right now, by the way. So it's not like some great trip to Yellowstone. Go ahead, finish your question.
No, I'm just curious. We've talked a lot about the presidential election, obviously, and implications and whatnot, but spend a little time just talking about kind of where you see the state of some of these Senate races. You mentioned Susan Collins, and you've got organizations even on the right, like the Lincoln Project, that are not just attacking Trump, but they're attacking some of these more moderate senators for supporting him. Yeah, I think just talk about the Senate races.
I think the Senate is the big issue right now. I mean, if you look at it at lay of the land and you go, okay, let's just say that Trump's going to lose, right? Which we don't know, and I'm not saying that, but if you put that aside, then it's all about the Senate. And you're starting to see some of the Republican senators finally, after 4 years, show a little distance with Trump and start to say, hey, well, I don't know what you think about the president, but you need to reelect me as a check on the Democratic president. I will say in the past, generally speaking, Senate races sort of tip in the way of the presidential results. The difference here is that the states that the Democrats need to win to take the majority are states Trump won and probably will win again, Montana being a good example. Montana, Trump won by 20 points, I think, in 2016. Recent poll had him like 5 to 7 points ahead. Steve Daines, the Republican incumbent, is running against Steve Bullock, the current governor. So it's kind of a race of two incumbents against each other, which is also weird. So the question there, and the question in Iowa, the question in North Carolina, is whether Trump can carry a state, but the Democrats can win the Senate. Right now, I think that the Democrats have a better than 50-50 chance, and maybe even better than that. Colorado Senate race is pretty much probably over. Cory Gardner, the Republican incumbent, against John Hickenlooper, the former governor. Again, it's sort of like two incumbents running against each other. Colorado trending Democratic. Trump's numbers are not good here. So Gardner's in big trouble. The Republicans have already pulled out some advertising. That's always the indicator that they think it's over. Arizona, Martha McSally, a very strange incumbent who lost her Senate race and then was appointed to John McCain's seat. So it's even worse than being appointed. She actually had previously lost. So if she loses, she'll be in this weird position of being someone who's lost both seats for a state in the US Senate. Democrats are running pretty well there. She's in trouble. So they're down there. Susan Collins has got big trouble. Republicans probably going to win, obviously, in Alabama, where Doug Jones, the Democrat, won the special election to replace Jeff Sessions, who I'm sure thinks that by now he should have stayed in the Senate instead of gone and been Attorney General. He had a Senate seat for life. And of course, he's out of politics now. So then it becomes about North Carolina, Iowa, Montana, and then but even some other states that we shouldn't even be talking about. Alaska, as we discussed earlier, I was in Alaska to check in on the congressional races earlier this year. Alaska, the Senate race is tied. Trump's numbers are not good there. The state's economy was already in recession, has been destroyed by COVID. So Kansas, there's an open seat there. The Democrat is in play. You know, Lindsey Graham, let's talk about Lindsey, who, of course, was chairing that Judiciary Committee, jammed that nomination through, even though he said he wouldn't do such a thing. Probably didn't hurt him politically in South Carolina, but allowed his opponent to raise tens of millions of dollars.
Yeah, that was an astonishing amount of money.
Just crazy amount of money. And he is just pounding Graham on TV, and to the point where Lindsey Graham is running around on Fox and in other places begging people to send him money. So Lindsey Graham is even in trouble. So, you know, when the Republicans are having to go in and buck up their candidates in Kansas, South Carolina, and Alaska, that's all you need to know about what the election's like, because they're on defense in places they shouldn't be on defense.
Let me pivot to a question that just came in the chat, and we've got about 15 more minutes. So if folks do have questions, I would encourage you to drop them in here to steer us for the last couple of minutes here. The national polls in 2016 were within a margin of error, but in key battleground states today, it looks as though Trump is polling even closer to Biden than he was than Hillary. Is there really a silent majority that will turn out on November 3rd, or are Trump supporters, quote, a loud minority?
Well, can you ask me that again on about November 10th?
Yeah, we'll ask you in 15 days.
Yeah, I will say this, that, I mean, I always kind of chuckle at national polling in presidential races because it tells you things, but it doesn't tell you who's going to win the presidential election. People have finally started to figure out the Electoral College. I mean, Trump likes to say, well, no one knew about the Electoral College before, which is obviously a Trumpism, but you know, people don't get exactly how it works. And I think now they are starting to. What matters in the presidential election is about 7 or 8 states. And that's where the fight is right now. I did see some polling this morning that had Trump doing a little better in Pennsylvania, which I think is a very, very key to the Biden candidacy. I mean, he claims the Scranton roots. They're really working Pennsylvania. And Florida. Florida is also the key to this to me, because what's happened with Trump is he's losing senior voters, which should be his strength. And Florida, you know, if Biden can win Florida and Pennsylvania, that's pretty much the election's over. I do think there are people out there, you know, there's shy Trump voters is what they've come to be called in the media this year, who won't say a lot about Trump, but will go and vote for him. But I think, what the analysis is so far showing us, that there's a lot of people who are much more interested in this election on the Democratic side, who are going to go vote. And in the key states, I mean, we have kind of written off Ohio as a swing state, but even Ohio is close, and Biden's spending a lot of effort there. I think that the Democrats the people who are coming out for Biden, it's probably people who didn't even vote the last time, or are going to outweigh, the analysis shows right now, the shy Trump voters. Trump's big problem is seniors and women. He's going to have probably the biggest gender gap in history. And it's just a hard thing to overcome for him. But, I don't want to say who's going to win this election. I have no clue. Maybe there's this big secret underground Trump surge going on right now that we're just not aware of, but it's not showing up. It's not showing up in anything. And in some ways, the polling has been super stable over the last few weeks. And that's why you see the president, they're really trying to get out some of these issues against Biden. The media's learned some lessons from 2016 too. I think we're being much more careful in our own reporting. As I said earlier, a lot of people have already voted. So some of the things that in the past might have worked to the advantage of Trump, like some last surge of his voters, I mean, that may not be the kind of thing that works this time.
Yeah, I used to do a bunch of casino gaming ballot initiative work, and I had a pollster once describe the voters that I was targeting as nose holders, where they were against gambling, but they would hold their nose and vote yes because of the money that would go to the school system or to the local community. And
you could say that about 2016 with Trump and the court, right?
Yeah.
This is the conservatives. They're like, well, God, I hate this guy. I mean, he's just not my kind of person, but I'm going to vote for him because I want him to fill that seat.
Yeah. Let me ask one more from the chat here. We hear some chatter lately about the need for a third party in America, and the difficulty that would be the difficulty of that in order to be successful. How many third party or middle of the road party election wins do you think it would actually take to start moving the needle back to the center, or quote, the way things used to be?
Like an independent candidate, a John Anderson type. It would have, our politics just don't seem to be trending in that way. Unless you want to count Kanye, I guess. I don't see it. It's just we're becoming more divided, not more center now. So I don't see any, and it's so structurally hard to get on all these ballots and run, and the parties are so determined to keep these other parties off because it's hurt them in the past. Now, one thing I will say about going to Alaska, and my whole story, and if the person who asked that is interested, could Google it up. It's what the candidates who are running as on the Democratic ticket up there are independents. They were independents who ran in the Democratic primary, and the Democratic Party in Alaska allowed this. You could run as an independent. They both won. So they're running as independents. So maybe that's something that could happen where people, just start to really want to eschew the party label and, say, hey, I'm an independent, and maybe that'll work. But I think it's hard right now. I really do. We're not in that frame of mind.
Yeah, and I think you hit it when you said structurally, where the way that we are just built is built for the two parties. But let me ask, what are your thoughts regarding kind of voter registration numbers? There was a surge in GOP voter registration in Florida, for example, and some other key states. Any reflections?
Yeah, I think that's to the Biden folks. I think that was worrisome, and I think maybe that's a sign of what we were talking about earlier, that there's an undercurrent here that we're just not picking up in the polling or in the interviewing. I don't know that it was the kind of numbers that could make a big impact, but it showed something was going on there. And the Republican Party is good at certain things. And it's funny about Florida in particular. The Republican Party, their whole approach down there used to be absentee balloting. That's how they used to sneak up on Democrats, with these big absentee and mail ballot efforts. And then you see the president start coming out against mail ballots, and it worried the Republicans in a place like Florida, because they're like, hey, wait a minute, this is how we do it. We come in at the end with a surge of ballots or surge of registrations, and we catch them off guard. We'll see if it works this time. I mean, there's tremendous energy on the left and in Democrats, and you see it in these folks who are lined up and waiting in line for hours in places now to vote. And I just think that's what the Democrats are counting on right now. But you see Biden's folks running around saying, hey, we haven't won this election, the polls are wrong. They're not going to make the Hillary mistake of overlooking some places. So I'm not sure that any of these last minute things we're seeing are going to be decisive.
Yeah. I mean, a ground game certainly matters. Bill Stepien, President Trump's campaign manager, and I shared an office in the 2006 midterms at the RNC, and then worked for Mayor Giuliani when he was running for president. And so I know how he thinks, and I know how they organize, and ground game certainly matters on election day, but this is
and they're good. But the thing the Democrats and the Republicans and Mitch McConnell himself would admit this, where the Democrats have pounded them is on Act Blue, on the small donor Democratic fundraising. And I mean, it's just been a huge difference. And I think that's where the Republicans have been alarmed. I think the Republicans, so I've been out on campaigns this year. The Republican candidates are much more still doing, not to the extent they would in the past, but are still doing much more in-person campaigning than Democrats, much more. Democrats, generally speaking, are running Zoom virtual campaigns. So I do think the Republicans have some advantages there on the ground, but they're getting killed on TV and in advertising. And I also think this is a weird thing. I didn't think this would work out this way, but I think some of these Democratic Senate challengers have benefited from the virtual campaign. They haven't had to go out and be subjected to sort of the more intense questioning they might get if they couldn't control their message so much. They haven't had to do events. They haven't been in front of the press. Some of them not that experienced. And in some ways, it's weird. I think it's been an advantage for them. I would not have predicted that.
Yeah. What you talked about Susan Collins' race in Maine, but let me ask a Trump question related to Maine. What do you think of the ranked choice voting in Maine, and do you think that will favor the president?
I don't know, honestly. It looks like he'll lose the one congressional district up there. I think the vote could be split again in Maine, also in Nebraska. The two places. I think the ranked voting might not benefit Susan Collins. So this is sort of an experiment. We're not really used to it. I think the president's having a tough time in Maine, and that's one of the reasons that Susan Collins is struggling, because she'll run well ahead of the president, but with his numbers so low, there might just not be a difference. Susan Collins running, as good a campaign as you can run in this situation, and she's got, she was behind the PPP program, the Paycheck Protection Program. Businesses in Maine really benefited from that, so she's really emphasizing that. But the Kavanaugh vote really hangs over her. And I had to laugh at the president the other day, because she said she wouldn't vote for a Supreme Court candidate before the election. My guess is that she probably wouldn't vote for Amy Coney Barrett anyway, because Susan Collins is pro-choice. Her argument for voting for Kavanaugh was that he had convinced her that he would uphold Roe. I don't know that she would vote for her. But here's Susan Collins, who is a Republican, votes pretty much Republican, not all the time, and on some of the big things now, in the fight of her life, and Donald Trump is undermining her on Twitter. I just didn't think that that was the best party political strategy there, and he just can't stop himself. And, but then you also look at that and go, well, does that help or hurt Susan Collins? Maybe some people up there will go, oh, well, at least Trump's mad at her. Maybe I'll vote for her. But definitely a big race to watch that night.
Certainly is. Well, one final question. Other than popping our popcorn, anything we should look out for at the debate this week?
I'm interested in how Trump reacts to his mic being cut off. They've changed the rules. I think, Biden, I thought so Trump set himself up for failure here. Again, I hate to be criticizing the president all the time, but it's the fact he went out and made it sound like Joe Biden couldn't get a sentence out, right? So at the first debate, all Biden had to do was, stay in it and breathing for most of it, and he would have beat the standard set by the president. Second debate fell apart. I actually found both of the town halls to be really interesting and enjoyable and fun to watch. Biden, again, I think, did what he needed to do. I think the Trump campaign recognized, even if they're changing the rules and we're unhappy, Trump, the president needs this debate. This is his last chance, and he's got to go out there and make the case. So can the president control himself? I mean, they're going to control the mics, but how does he respond to that? He'd obviously gone out that first time and just wanted to throw Biden off his stride. Didn't work. Now they're going to shut off the mic. I think it's, this is a debate that has some real, this is it. This is the last big moment of the campaign. Trump needs to turn it around. Can he do it?
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for your time. This has been a really invigorating conversation. I know I truly enjoyed it. I hope my colleagues and our clients did as well.
Yeah, there's so much going on. I hope it wasn't too much in the weeds on some of this stuff, but.
No, I thought it was great. And I could not recommend the book more to everybody watching, Confirmation Bias. Check it out. And I know that I'm going to grab a few copies for our team as well. So, Carl, thank you again for taking the time. I know it's early in the morning. We're very grateful.
Enjoy the last 2 weeks of what has been a pretty wild ride, I have to say.
That's true.
All right,
That's
thanks,
true.
guys.
Thank you, Carl. Safe travels to Montana tomorrow.
Thank you.
Bye.